Hey everyone, welcome back for another deep dive. You ready to go island hopping today?
Let's do it. Always up for an adventure.
Excellent. Today's adventure takes us to the Caribbean, and we're going to learn about the fascinating world of Hutias.
Cool.
Now, for anyone who's never heard of a Hutia, I like to think of them as like a guinea pig,
Yeah.
but like a supersized guinea pig.
Yeah, they can get pretty big, some of them.
Yeah, and they have this amazing story of survival and adaptation hanging out on these islands for millions of years.
Definitely. They're one of the few native land mammals in the entire Caribbean, which is pretty amazing.
That's incredible. So to kick things off, let's paint a picture for our listeners. What exactly is a Hutia?
So picture this. A rodent. Kind of, like you said, like a guinea pig, but with this sturdy, robust build, almost like they've been hitting the gym. They've got these short, strong legs, perfect for navigating their island homes, and a long, noticeable tail. I think that's one of their most distinctive features. It helps them with balance as they're scampering around.
Scampering. I love that visual. And speaking of visuals, you mentioned some of these guys can get surprisingly large. I mean, how big are we talking?
Oh yeah, size is one of the things that makes them so interesting. You've got some species, like the smallest ones, coming in at around 20 centimeters. That's, a decent size. But then you've got the real heavyweights. Some can reach a whopping 60 centimeters.
Wow.
To put that in perspective, that's basically the size of a house cat.
That's a big rodent. I mean, that changes the picture in my head.
Definitely not your average mouse.
Oh, yeah.
And actually, there used to be a species called the giant Cuban Hutia that was even bigger. Sadly, it's extinct now, but we think it was probably closer to the size of a small dog.
That's wild. All right, so we've got a mental picture of these supersized guinea pigs roaming around. So where exactly can we find them in the Caribbean? What islands are we talking about?
They're pretty widespread across the region, which is really cool. You can find them on some of the bigger islands like Cuba, Jamaica, Hispaniola, and the Bahamas too. But the interesting thing is they're not just confined to beaches or one type of habitat. They've adapted to all sorts of environments. I mean, think about the Caribbean. You've got these lush, mountainous rainforests.
Right.
You've got these tangled mangrove forests along the coasts. You've even got pine forests and caves. And Hutias have managed to carve out a niche in all of these places.
They're real survivors, that's for sure. Now, I have to ask, what are these guys fueling all that island hopping with? What's on the Hutia menu?
Well, they're primarily herbivores, so their diet mainly consists of all the good stuff the islands have to offer. I'm talking leaves, fruits, bark, roots. They even munch on seeds. It's like they're the Caribbean's very own lawnmowers, keeping the vegetation in check. Actually, there's a great example of this with the Hispaniola and Hutia in the Dominican Republic.
Tell me more.
So these guys, they love to eat the seeds of the African tulip tree, which is actually an invasive species in the Dominican Republic. And by munching on these seeds, they help control the spread of this tree, which allows the native plants to thrive. So they're not just eating, they're actually doing the ecosystem a huge favor.
It's like they're little gardeners, too. They're really working hard for their island homes. But I read that they're not strictly vegetarian. Is that right?
That's right. They're what we call opportunistic omnivores. So while they're perfectly happy munching on leaves and fruits, they're not afraid to add a little protein to their diet if the chance arises. They've been observed eating insects, snails, and get this, they've even been seen using their powerful jaws to crack open snail shells. So they're resourceful, too.
Talk about adaptable. All right, so they're strong, they're adaptable, they know how to find a good meal. But what about their social lives? Are they loners, or do they like to hang out in groups?
Hutias are actually very social animals. They live in these family groups. It's kind of adorable. They'll often huddle together in tree hollows or burrows for protection and warmth. And they groom each other, chatter away with these chirps and grunts and whistles. It's like a big furry family reunion.
And that's a party I'd love to crash. But are these Hutia hangouts happening all day long?
Actually, no. They're most active during dawn and dusk, which is what we call crepuscular behavior.
Crepuscular, got it.
Right. So there are a couple of reasons for this. Firstly, it helps them avoid the intense midday heat in the Caribbean. Makes sense, right?
Yeah.
And secondly, it helps them stay under the radar of predators like owls and snakes that might be more active during the day or at night. So they're pretty smart about when they choose to come out and play.
Smart move.
Yeah.
Now, I know we can't talk about any animal without talking about babies. So what's the deal with Hutia babies? Are we talking like a dozen little ones running around?
Not quite. Actually, this is one of the things that sets them apart from other rodents. They have a surprisingly low birth rate, usually just 1 or 2 offspring per litter. And their gestation period is pretty long, too, around 100 to 120 days. So, yeah, definitely not a dozen babies.
Hmm. So quality over quantity when it comes to Hutia parenting, huh?
Exactly. And, these babies, they're born pretty well developed. They've got fur, their eyes are open.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, they're ready to explore the world pretty much from the get-go.
That's so cool. But I imagine that slow reproductive rate probably makes them pretty vulnerable, especially given all the challenges these islands face.
You're absolutely right. That low reproductive rate is a big factor when we talk about conservation.
Which brings us to a slightly more serious topic. The conservation status of Hutias. What's the current situation?
Unfortunately, many Hutia species are facing some pretty serious challenges these days.
What are the main threats?
It's a combination of factors. Habitat loss is a major one. As forests are cleared for agriculture or development, Hutias lose their homes and their food sources. Yeah.
That makes sense.
And then you've got hunting pressure. Some people hunt Hutias for food or because they see them as pests. And on top of that, there's the introduction of invasive predators like mongooses, cats, and rats. These guys can really wreak havoc on native populations.
Wow. So these Hutias are really getting hit from all sides. Makes you realize how fragile things can be, especially on islands. Are there any specific examples that come to mind?
Absolutely. The Jamaican Hutia, or coney as it's known locally, is a prime example.
Interesting.
It was once really abundant in Jamaica, like
Hmm.
widespread, but now its population has really dwindled.
Oh.
Yeah, mainly due to habitat destruction and the introduction of the small Asian mongoose.
So those invasive species are really causing trouble.
They are. Mongooses prey on young Hutias.
Oh, that's awful.
Yeah, it's really sad to see. But the good news is that there are conservation groups working hard to protect the remaining populations. They're working on habitat preservation, monitoring populations. It's definitely a tough battle, but they're making progress.
Well, that gives me some hope. But aside from mongooses, are there other threats we should be aware of?
Something that people might not think about as much is the competition from other introduced rodents.
Oh, like what?
Yeah, like rats and mice. They might seem small, but they can really outcompete Hutias for food and resources.
It's amazing how such seemingly small creatures can have such a big impact. It's a reminder that everything is connected.
Right. And it also underscores just how important Hutias are to the overall health of these island ecosystems.
Speaking of which, you mentioned earlier how Hutias help control the spread of invasive plants. What are some of the other ways they benefit their environment?
Well, one of their most important roles is seed dispersal. As they're going about their day foraging for fruit, they often bury seeds, which helps with plant regeneration.
It's like they're accidental gardeners.
Exactly. They don't even realize it, but they're helping to plant the next generation of trees and shrubs, and this is really important for maintaining the diversity of the island forests. A great example of this is the Bahamian Hutia. They're known to be key players in the regeneration of palm trees, which are so vital to the Bahamian ecosystem.
Wow, so protecting Hutias isn't just about saving one species. It's about protecting the entire web of life on these islands.
Exactly. It's all connected. And we also can't forget that they're an important food source for other animals in the Caribbean. You've got owls, snakes, even some larger lizards that rely on Hutias for food. They're a crucial link in the food chain.
It's amazing how we can learn so much from a creature that many people have never even heard of. I mean, I certainly knew very little about Hutias before we started this deep dive.
I think that's what makes them so fascinating. They're this hidden gem of the Caribbean.
And not just ecologically important, but they also have cultural significance too, right?
But absolutely. In some parts of the Caribbean, Hutias have been a traditional food source for centuries. Yeah. And they've also found their way into local folklore and stories. For example, in Cuba, there are all sorts of legends about these giant Hutias that used to roam the island. And these cultural connections, I think they can be really powerful tools for raising awareness about Hutias and their conservation needs.
It's like these stories help bridge the gap between science and culture. It's a reminder that conservation isn't just about data and statistics, it's about connecting with people on a deeper level.
Couldn't have said it better myself.
So as we wrap things up, what's one key takeaway you hope our listeners will remember about Hutias?
I think the most important takeaway is that even seemingly insignificant creatures can play an absolutely essential role in their ecosystems. The decline of Hutias in the Caribbean could have this ripple effect across the islands, impacting everything from plant diversity to the populations of other animals, even the soil health. It's a reminder that we need to protect the interconnectedness of life, no matter how small or unassuming some of the players might seem.
That's a powerful message. and it's something I know I'll be thinking about long after this deep dive. Well, that's all the time we have for today, but we hope you've enjoyed learning about these fascinating island dwellers as much as we have.
It's been a blast.
If you're as intrigued by Hutias as we are, we encourage you to do some research on your own.
There's a whole world to discover.
Trust us, it's worth the time. Until next time, happy exploring.
See you then.